is ready to speak to us about emergency preparedness in Arlington County. This is the month. And at this point, I'll turn it over to Gary to give us our instructions on how to Zoom from here. And welcome, Tania.
Okay, we're going to do this the way we always do it. We're ask everybody else to put themselves on mute. And if you've got questions or comments, enter them into the chat. And we will watch that and relay them to Tania as they come in. And we are going to be recording this. So if you don't want to be on camera, turn your camera off. And otherwise, I think we're ready to go. So it's all yours, Tania.
Thank you. Wonderful. I'm going to start sharing my screen. All right. Hopefully everyone can see my screen and can hear me. Mm-hmm. Perfect. Awesome. Let me just get this back up and I will be ready to rock and roll. Well, thank you, everyone. Good morning. I'm so excited to be here with you. My name is Tania Bougebrayel. I use she, her, hers pronouns. I've got blonde, middle-length hair, hazel eyes, and I'm wearing a black shirt today. I'm joining you from the Arlington County Department of Public Safety, Communications, and Emergency Management. And I'm really excited to be here to talk about how you can prepare for an emergency and also to celebrate National Preparedness Month, which is the month of September. So thank you very much, Carolyn, Anita, Mary, and Gary for inviting me to be here. I've got my coffee ready to go and I'm very excited. So what we're going to talk a little bit about today. First, I'm going to give you a little bit of an overview about what emergency managers do, what our role is, and then we'll talk a little bit about our department and the different function areas that exist within Arlington County, some of which you may recognize from things that have popped up in the past 2.5 years. And we're going to identify what an emergency is, and we're going to talk about 3 preparedness steps that you can take today to get you and your household better prepared. We're going to do a little bit of a deep dive into those steps. So we're going to talk about how you can be informed and know who to call, how you can make an emergency plan, and how you can build an emergency kit. And then we'll end with some question and answers at the end. As Gary was saying, if you have any questions, you need me to repeat anything, you want me to go back to a slide, please feel free to raise your hand or put it in the chat. I'm happy to stop and go back. So not a problem whatsoever. All right. So with that being said, what do emergency managers do? I would be lying if I didn't say I get asked this question a lot. What do you guys do? Do you guys only show up during an emergency? Are you there for every emergency? What qualifies as an emergency, etc.? So the way that I explain the role of an emergency manager is personnel that is involved when an incident is large in scale and has multiple parts, or it requires additional resources other than first responders. So other than just fire, EMT, police department. And the way that I like to describe it is if you think of 2 separate incidents, let's say there's unfortunately a car accident, it's a single vehicle, police respond as well as fire. They transport anyone who needs, they triage anyone on site, or they give support to anyone who needs, resources right on site, and they take them to the medical facilities accordingly. And while that is a scary incident, it's a pretty, I hate to use the term simple. I'm using that not to take away from the gravity of the situation, but to say that it is smaller in impact. So if you were to compare an incident like that to, let's say, a flood that impacts a multifamily building that has hundreds of condos in it, they're 2 very different scale events and they require different response capacities. So in addition to, in the flooding example, in addition to having police and fire and EMS on the scene, you're also probably going to be setting up a shelter. There's going to be transportation, paratransit options. There's a lot of moving parts. And that's where emergency managers come into place, because they are the ones that come in and organize everything so that it's not chaos. In many ways, we like to joke that we are the chaos coordinators. You'll probably hear me say that a lot through this presentation. But some of the things that we do immediately when we get on scene is we gather the facts. We ask who's in charge, what's happening, is the situation getting better, is it getting worse, and what needs to be done about it. One of the things that we are really really big on doing almost immediately is connecting people to organization. And there's that word chaos again, turning chaos into organization. So a lot of times when decisions are made at the top level, whether it's by administrators or by officials, that information has to trickle down to the boots on the ground folks. So your PD, your EMTs, your fire, or anyone just supporting immediately on the ground. And that's really what we do. We try to build that bridge between the decision makers and translate what's happening at the top to those that are on site. We also manage information as well as resources and consequences. We'll talk a lot about how we manage resources in a little bit here. We keep everyone in constant communication, and our biggest goal is to restore order as in a sense of order as quickly as possible. We often joke that we are the chaos coordinators, right? Because that is something that we like to do. And these photos that I showed up here, there's a couple different scenarios that emergency managers have been involved in. The top right one, where you see the gentleman and the woman in the wheelchair, that is at one of our vaccine clinics. In the past 2.5 years in Arlington County, the Department of Emergency Management has been teaming up with the Department of Public Health to handle the COVID-19 response. So that stems from testing to vaccine sites to mobile clinics. So that's what you see some of our team members doing there. I mentioned resources. We have a huge logistics warehouse, which is where we kept a lot of the stuff for the vaccine clinics, for example. And that's what you see in that middle top photo. That's our team over at Quincy in our logistics warehouse, getting some items set for a setup. And then the other two photos, I believe the one in the far left corner is one that I took from FEMA, but that is a response to a disaster that happened in an area. You could see that they're distributing resources. There's some water, there's some food supplies there. And then also there's several different agencies. It looks like the National Guard is there, as well as some emergency managers. So there's lots of moving pieces when an incident happens. And then the bottom picture is just a picture at a shelter. So just some examples of when you might see emergency managers out in the wild, so to speak. So a little bit about my department, the Department of Public Safety Communications and Emergency Management, or just emergency management. Our mission is to coordinate emergency preparedness, response, and recovery capabilities, but also resources and outreach in the Arlington community. So in simple terms, this means that our team is responsible not only for responding to emergencies, but also to communicate with the public on what's happening and to coordinate the response and recovery efforts. So we work with different departments across the county, as well as with our federal and state partners in some of those photos I showed you, and make sure that resources and services are available to our community during and after an emergency. And of course, we want to make sure that our community is prepared in case of an emergency. A lot of what we do, I would say 80% of it happens to fall under preparedness, right? And so like I mentioned earlier, we're the chaos coordinators. We do a little bit of everything. Our office specifically is split into 3 different service areas. The first might be the one that most people are familiar with. It's the Emergency Communication Center, or the ECC. This is the team that is behind the phone when you call 911. So when you call 911 and you get an emergency responder, that is our team, and they dispatch your call accordingly based on what you need, whether it's fire, medical, etc. The second group of team members that we have, or service area, is what we call our emergency management segment. This is actually broken up into 3 different divisions. The first, which is the bottom picture down here, is planning and preparedness. I said about 80% of our work is planning and is preparedness. And so what that team does is they write the plans. So whether it's an emergency response plan, it's a continuity of operations plan, they're the ones that are taking the pen and the paper and they're writing everything down, and they're making sure that we not only have a plan for our department, but as well as for our county and everyone that's in the county, right? Not just departments in the county, but the entire county itself. They also want us to make sure that we're trained on those plans. So a big part of what they do is they run exercises. They'll run drills so that we put everything into practice. In case an emergency does happen, we know how to action or operationalize the plans that they spend a lot of time putting together. The top right-hand corner up here with the gentleman, and that's our warehouse team. I mentioned logistics and resources. That's a big part of emergency management. They are over at Quincy and they manage all of our supplies. As you guys probably remember, when COVID first hit in 2020, this team, as you can imagine, was an overdrive because of the need for supplies, whether it was hand sanitizer, masks, robes, etc. They were really ahead of the game and really started placing orders and making sure that we could try to get resources to whomever needed them as quickly as possible, given the constraints that were happening at the time. And then last on the emergency management team is our watch desk. Our watch desk is essentially our awareness team. They are responsible for essentially open source intelligence and monitoring. So in the photo in the top left corner, you'll see the gentleman monitoring some video cameras. He's monitoring the police chatter in the region, as well as fire and EMS. He's looking at maps. He's making sure that if anything happens, we are all situationally aware and we get pinged almost immediately in the case of a large scale event.
Tania, we have a question here.
Sure.
What technologies do you use to coordinate communications among the various departments and all the moving pieces? Is it cell phones, computers, radios?
That's a great question. The answer to that is all of the above. I am a communications professional and engagement professional by trade. And so I believe in redundancy because I think it creates fail safes, especially in the case that a communication system might go down. Right. So one of the things that we always prepare for in emergency management is how are you going to address the situation and what tools are you going to use, but then also what's your backup. So for example, I'll use COVID as an example. We used Microsoft Teams, became our best friend, as I'm sure Zoom, other virtual platforms did as well. We use our cell phones, email, phone. We do have radios that we are on a separate frequency from everyone else. And then we also have emergency responder cell phones as well. So we try to make sure that we hit every mark just in case one of our systems goes down, we have a backup. All of us, even in our own homes, I'm currently sitting and having coffee with you from my living room, but right next to me is my MiFi that goes with me. This is a portable internet device that I will take with me anywhere I go. Just in case I lose signal, I can stay connected to everyone. So all of the above. And a lot of times, realistically, when you're on site, if you're responding to an emergency, you're communicating with the team just in person. And a lot of time, if a situation requires for us to set up an emergency operations center, we will all be in one space coordinating together because that's the easiest and most efficient way. So all of the above.
So we have a related question. How does Arlington stay in touch with the many jurisdictions and various federal, state, and local counterparts on different types of emergencies?
Constant open communication. And a lot of it is relationship building as well. So one of the first things that we do is we make sure, as a new member, for example, joins our team, we make sure that they are connected with their counterparts in the region and that they're aware of all the resources that are available. Additionally, our leadership and several members of different teams, not so much my team because we tend to do the outreach in our community specifically, but especially with the preparedness and planning team, they all work regionally. They have weekly meetings, they're on Teams chats, they're in each other's, phones all the time, regular constant communication. And then they also collaborate on things because something that's unique about this area is that we are all so densely populated, we're all so close together, but we're all in the general capital region. So when you're in a national capital region, an event that happens in DC, while it might be only 2 miles away, can still have direct impact in Arlington. So we are really coordinated, not just in our communication, but in all of our planning. When it comes to our walkout planning, our response planning, very shortly here, the hazard mitigation plan, which is a regional effort in all of Northern Virginia is going to be launching. So I would say they are in constant regular communication on all sorts of communication devices, but they're also we're really tight in our planning regionally together as well. Any other questions for me?
Not right now.
Okay. All right. I'll hop along to talk about my favorite segment of our team. I'm a little biased here because this is the team I'm on. We're called the Integrated Programs team, and our responsibilities include volunteer coordination. Some of you might be familiar with CERT, which is the Community Emergency Response Team. The CERT coordinator happens to work on our team. So there are awesome cohort of volunteers that are triggered in the case of an emergency. We also are responsible for communications, resilience. We've got a human resources and finance part of our team, and most importantly, outreach, education, and events like this. We really integrate with other departments across the county, as well as organizations in our community, to make sure that the public is informed and knows what to do. And I think one of the things that we're responsible for doing is we take a lot of these complex plans that I mentioned and a lot of these really high-level emergency planning tactics, and we translate them to the public in easy to understand ways. So instead of, for example, giving you the hazard mitigation plan or talking to you about an evacuation plan, I'll walk you through tips on how to get prepared for your household, because that's something that's a little bit more tangible, easier to understand and digest, and still gets us to where we need to be in terms of preparedness. And a lot of our resources go towards funding programs that we do with the community. We recently were at the county fair, which I know many of you were because I stopped by and saw your table. So the county fair is a big event that we like to do, the public safety block party, which just happened last week. And then lots of these situations where they're one-offs, we're in the community, we're talking about preparedness. And we try to be that bridge between emergency management and like the big concepts in the public. So it's a little bit about our team. So I want to talk a little bit about emergencies, which is the bulk of what we're here to talk about. So I'm curious, I want to ask everyone, if you're willing to put it in the chat, what do you think constitutes an emergency? Hopefully someone will give me some ideas. What do you think makes up an emergency?
So we've got failure of drinking water,
Okay.
earthquake, big snowstorm,
Okay.
life-threatening events, flooding.
Flooding, life-threatening events. Those are all good answers. Go ahead.
Yep, an unexpected series of events.
That's another one, unexpected series of events. That's absolutely true. So one of the things that I want to talk about when we think about an emergency is oftentimes it's sudden, it's urgent, it usually requires immediate attention, and it's usually unexpected. And it could be cascading. I think someone mentioned the word series. And so understanding an emergency and kind of what makes up an emergency, there's a lot of great examples that were mentioned there. A flood. There's also medical emergencies, right? If you have a fall, if you're having tight chest and tough time breathing, right? If you're potentially having a heart attack, those are all things that potentially could be an emergency. And the reason why we talk about this a little bit is to understand when it's important to call 911 and when we can utilize other numbers in our toolkit and that we might have, and how that could actually get us what we need quicker than calling 911. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that here. We'll get to that when we talk about phone numbers. But now I'm really curious as to, those were all really good answers that everyone put in the chat. So what would you do to prepare for an emergency? And this isn't a trick question. What would you do?
Plan, food and water.
Food and water. Okay.
That first aid kit.
First aid kit's a really good one.
A fire escape ladder.
Fire escape ladder. Okay, that's a good one.
Flashlights.
Flashlights. That's one of my favorites. Okay.
Batteries.
Batteries. Okay, we're given a bunch of items that they're good to have around the house. That's wonderful. Anything else?
Radio.
Radio. We're going to talk about radios in a little bit too. Awesome. That is great. So if there's one thing that I hope that you take from today's presentation, it's that there's 3 really easy steps that you can do. And these 3 steps will not take you a lot of time. And they can be done from the comfort of your own home with items that you have around your house. And they will really help you be prepared for an emergency. The first is be informed. Have sources of information. We're gonna do a deep dive into each one of these and know who to call, right? I mentioned that 911 is not always the phone number you're gonna call. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. Making an emergency plan. What is an emergency plan? What do you need to know? What components need to go in it? That's really important. And then thirdly, which a lot of you were mentioning different items to go in your emergency kit, building an emergency kit or an emergency bag, grab bag, goes by many, many names, which we'll talk about. So first and foremost, be informed. So as I mentioned, emergencies can happen at any time with little or no notice. So it's really important to do everything that you can to be prepared for one, right? And the first step to doing this is being informed. And that means having reliable and multiple ways of receiving information in a case of an emergency. And this will allow you to be situationally aware and able to monitor the situation as it changes. So for example, I think someone mentioned a flood a little earlier, inclement weather. Snowstorm is another example that was mentioned earlier in the chat. So if you know a snowstorm is coming, one of the things you're probably going to want to do is monitor the Weather Channel, right? Keep an eye on the storm, see when it's supposed to hit, watch the snowfall, check the status of the roads if you have to leave your home or if anyone's coming to your home. So thinking through different examples of how to receive information. Some examples might include a battery operated or crank radio. And the photo that I have on the screen, I love this guy. I recommend it to everyone. This was a $15 purchase from Amazon. It is a crank radio, so you can charge it up. It runs on battery, but it also has a solar function and a crank option. And it has a little USB port, so you can charge your mobile devices as well. So it's a great $15 purchase if you're able to have in your home, and know that you will always have a source of information coming to you. TV or news, a little photo of a TV up there in the corner. WERA, our radio station, you can always listen in. A trusted family or friend, right? So buddy system. I will be honest with you, more times than not, I will get a phone call from my mother before I'm even looking at the news. And she'll say, Tania, what's going on? I saw this. So a lot of times having that buddy system is a great way to go. And then if you're online, there's a lot of online resources. So there's our website, which is Ready Arlington, and we have a Facebook and a Twitter where we post consistently, update you on any sort of change in status. Same with the Weather Channel, right? So they've got NOAA, and as well as the Weather Channel's got a Facebook and a Twitter. So does the county, the police department, fire, and environmental services. All of our departments kind of have their own channel and ways to update you with information. So there's a lot of different ways to get information. It's just important that you have multiple options, right?
We have a comment here that many of our oldest members don't really have much in the way of technology. And if the electricity goes out, they are really challenged.
That is a great point. And I'm going to talk. So when you think about in terms of resources and in terms of online resources. So there's a couple other options to think through. I personally believe in the buddy system. I have a personal buddy system set up with my neighbor that lives across the hall. We always check on each other's spaces when one of us is out. We both have pets, and we both are able to keep each other in the loop in case anything's happening. So for example, when I was traveling about a couple months ago, there was some serious rainfall that was happening. He sent me a message and he gave me a call and he said, hey, just making sure you're okay. You know, we got a flood warning that's coming in near our area. Just be careful if you're driving home. Things like that, which are because I wasn't monitoring the situation at the time. I was out of state. So it was really having that buddy system is very helpful. That's why I really also am a big fan of the radio. Radio is having that in your home is a way to ensure that you will be in that constant communication. Have a family, that buddy system, a family or friend help you set it to that radio station. Make sure it's plugged into charge. So when you need it, it's right there and ready to go. And it also can help you if you have a mobile device that you need to charge as well. And then one of the things that I really want to talk about, speaking of ways to get information, is Arlington Alert. Arlington Alert is the county's free notification system. And the reason why I stress this is because you will get, if you sign up for Arlington Alert, you can use either your cell phone, your landline, or your email address, and you will get notified in case of an emergency based on the options that you opt in for. So what I mean by this is I subscribe, for example, to all traffic alerts, weather, and just general emergencies. So anytime there's something happening in my area, my mobile device will ping and it'll tell me, you know, flood warning or flood watch or thunderstorm, et cetera. You can opt, and I also have it located based on my geolocation. So based on my address, it'll ask you for that as well. But what's really great is that If you're not on your phone all the time, and I realize that not everyone is glued to their mobile device, they'll also be willing to send you an email, and you can also get a call to your landline. And you don't need to have all three to receive these alerts. So if you're to the question, posed earlier, Gary, about I'm not as tech savvy, I'm not as comfortable on my phone or on my computer, what can I do? Signing up for Arlington Alert using a landline or just a phone number means that they'll call you, and you'll get a phone response saying this is happening in your area. And it's a great way to stay informed, especially if it's something that's urgent. And you only need one. I can't stress that enough. Most people get really intimidated because the sign up process isn't as fun. If anyone needs help signing up for Arlington Alert, I'm happy to make myself available at any time to help you walk through the process, but it's just another great resource to get information. It's very localized for the county. Any questions for me thus far? Move forward. Good.
Nope, I don't see anything new.
Okay. All right. So important phone numbers and knowing who to call. So knowing who to call in an emergency can really save lives. And writing down important phone numbers and keeping them somewhere safe is another really helpful tip in the case of a power outage or losing internet, electricity in general, et cetera. So earlier I mentioned that not all situations require calling 911. You should only be calling 911 in emergencies such as fire or a medical emergency, a break-in, a crime, you're having pains in your chest, et cetera. But there's a lot of phone numbers that you can use as a resource in Arlington County. And then when you're in doubt, you can always call the non-emergency line, but using those other numbers a lot of times might be able to get you where you need to go without having to call 911 immediately. So what do I mean by this? I'll give you a little bit of an example. I listed a huge list over here, but so I'll give you an example of, let's say, environmental services. That's the contact center. DES, so the Department of Environmental Services, is responsible for any sort of signs falling down, right? So let's say your neighborhood stop sign, you notice it fallen on the ground. That's not urgent enough to call 911, but calling DES immediately, they will put in a request and their team will come out and fix it usually within 24 hours. So sometimes utilizing those phone numbers is actually a lot quicker and more efficient than going through 911 and using that service. It also means that 911 is being used for those that are in immediate need of response, right? So, and we're able to use that resource to go to immediate emergencies. But there's a lot of numbers I listed here. There's a non-emergency line, the Virginia Department of Transportation, water and sewer is a big one. So that's a really helpful number to have written down. There's emergency shelters in Arlington. There's also emergency pet shelters at Arlington Animal Welfare League. There's also your Comcast, your Fios, and every building might be a little different, but I do know that in my condo, we are told that when we smell gas, we call the gas company immediately. And you're welcome to call the fire department, but they tell that that's the instructions they give us as well. So you're calling both because they're the ones that are actually going to come out. So lots of different numbers that are available to you, as well as APS, and then just general county phone numbers as well. One other thing that I always recommend writing down. So I mentioned those county phone numbers, and I'm going to show you something here momentarily that I like to keep on my fridge. I like to have those written down, but I like to have personal contacts and phone numbers down. This is really helpful if in case there is an outage and you need to access, or let's be honest, when an emergency happens, and probably the last thing you want to do is be shuffling through your phone book to look for a phone number, right? It's so much easier if it's right there in front of you. And so 2 things to keep in mind: 2 emergency points of contact. I like to have a family member that does not live in the immediate vicinity that can check in. And I also make sure that my house, they have everyone on my household's information, so my partner's information as well. Just in case we're separated, they can serve as a point of contact. I mentioned a buddy system. My neighbor is my buddy system. He lives across the hall from me. So he's also one of my emergency points of contact. Your doctors, really important. Do you ever need to get a hold of your doctor or multiple doctors, your specialists? Your local pharmacy. If you have any pets at home or in your household, your vet. If there's any children or grandchildren in your household, having their daycare number, their school number written down. If you have a housing provider, if you live in affordable housing, or if you have a management company, a property management company, that's an important phone number to have written down too, because a lot of times they're going to be the ones that come and give you, respond to your requests on site, right? And then other phone numbers that you might consider writing down. So I'm curious I'll ask everyone if there's anything else that they think I missed. What other phone numbers might you consider putting on your fridge or putting somewhere safe?
Your insurance phone numbers.
Insurance, that's a huge
I mean,
one.
like house. If your house floods or your house is burning, you need to, at the end, have your insurance number to call somebody.
100%. Your insurance number, and maybe even a copy of your insurance card in your wallet or in your pocketbook. Absolutely. Anything else? Insurance is a really good one. Very good tip. So I will share, and I'll show you guys something here shortly that I like to keep on my fridge that has all of this information in it as well. So really important.
Before you do, we've got a couple of questions and a comment.
Sure.
The first question was your department involved in setting up and meeting out the first COVID-19 vaccines?
Yes. So our department was, so when the pandemic began, there's something that emergency managers like to follow. It's called the command system. And so we essentially, public health and emergency management formed a partnership, and they were the ones responsible for the response efforts. So, and that is, now that being said, because COVID was such a rapidly changing dynamic situation, and in the county, we follow basically what's happening at the state level. So I'll use the vaccines as an example. Very early on, we were told that jurisdictions would be doing their own pre-registration for the vaccine. I don't know if that rings the bell for anyone. I think this was December, maybe January 2021. And then shortly thereafter, it switched to a state registration. And then about a month or so after that, we no longer required anyone to pre-register for the vaccine. And so we're constantly adapting to those changes, and our model had to change accordingly. So one of the things the county did, for example, was that we stood up an organization, a community organization called the Complete Vaccination Committee, which was a coalition of community members. I believe Wendy was on from A&V, if memory serves me correctly. And basically their job was to share with us, here are all of the communities in Arlington. Here's the way in which we communicate with our group, with our neighborhood, with our organization, and here's what you need to know. And so from that, we were able to get really useful information. I mentioned partnerships a little bit earlier. They're essential in everything that we do in local government, because they not only help us build trust, but they give us an ear on the ground in ways that we may not have before. And to give you a small example, we heard from a leader, one of our leaders in our Latino community, that some of the information that was being shared was really hard to understand. It was really high level. It was kind of wonky and a little bit long and dense. And they said, you know, what we could really use is very simple infographics, some simple infographics, potentially videos in native languages. And so we did. So when we were doing some of those key messaging about wear a mask, wash your hands, keep 6 feet distance really early on, instead of sending it as like a press release, for example, or putting it online, we turned it into 30-second videos done in native languages, mostly with graphics. And we pushed that out wide and far with our community. And we found that that was a lot easier way to get information than was previously used. So we really, really heavily rely on feedback from our community.
Okay, the next question is, you listed the emergency shelter phone number. Will that provide places to go if there's a big emergency?
So that's a great question. And hats off to whoever caught that. So emergency sheltering is for those that don't have a permanent residence. And so, however, if a situation does require emergency sheltering, so if there is a flood that impacts a building with multiple homes, or you're in a flood zone, or there's a fire, et cetera, the county will help you find sheltering. So that's not a phone number that we have, because we wouldn't stand up that service until it's needed. But that emergency sheltering phone number is if you ever find yourself displaced, you could call that number and they would help you find the resources.
Okay, the next question is, do you need to reload the Arlington alerts if you change your phone?
If you change a phone number, that's a great question. So I think the best thing to do would be to log in And I can help assist with that if needed. You would log in and you would just make sure your information's up to date. And I think that's important because if you, like, let's say you change an address, for example, that'll change your radius of where your notifications come in as well. If you've provided more than one source, so if you've listed your home phone number, your cell phone, and your email, and just your home phone number has changed, that should be okay because you should be receiving it on other sources. However, it's just good practice to go ahead and update the information if you can, just to make sure.
And lastly, we have a comment from somebody that they find the Arlington alerts very helpful.
Well, I'm glad. I'm very glad. I feel that I get worried sometimes when I present that because some members have said, oh, I don't want to get spammed. Well, you won't get spammed. You're just going to get notified if there is a situation that could impact your safety immediately around you. So I'm very glad to hear that. All right. So we talked about the first step, having those phone numbers, county phone numbers, knowing who to call, and having your personal phone numbers. Let's hop into step number 2, making an emergency plan. So it's really important for you and your household to have a plan that can help everyone stay calm and know what to do during an emergency. And if you do have other members in your household, you may not all be together when emergency happens. So having a plan for where you might meet, or having a way to get out of locations that you might frequent other than your home. So whether you go to a park or a community center or a friend's house, or you're still go to work, or you have pick up your grandkids from school, having a plan on what you would do should you be in those locations is really helpful. So what should your emergency plan include? Well, it should include a meeting place, somewhere to go in the case that your home is inaccessible or you're not together when an emergency happens. It should have copies of personal contacts and important information of phone numbers. We just talked about that, right? So your insurance provider, your doctor, all those important numbers that you might need to have. And then it really should include your personalized needs and important medical information. And we'll get into this a little bit here. So what do I mean by this? So it's important to plan for specific needs in your household. And I always recommend that you have all of this information written down somewhere that's accessible. So when we're thinking about specific needs for your household, I like to make sure I have the name and types of medication that I'm on and how often I take them and what my dosage is. I write down any medical devices that I may have or any other medical information, like allergies, for example, that's a big one, or any medical equipment you might use. Having those written down is very helpful. Any medical alert information and any transportation needs. These are all things you need to think about as you're writing an emergency plan and ways that you can best prepare for yourself. So for example, and I'll use my household as an example. If I have medicine that I need to keep in my fridge or keep cool, that's something that I always keep a plan for. So it's part of my emergency plan that should I need to leave my house in a rush, I have a Ziploc bag. Very simple, small quart-size Ziploc bag that's filled with water that's in my freezer. I can grab that, I can throw it in my bag, and that becomes a nice pack. And essentially that helps keep any medicine that I need to keep refrigerated cool for a period of time. And so it's a quick and easy way for me to plan in the case that I would need to leave my household in a rush. And consider putting this information on your fridge. It can also help first responders in the case that you're unable to speak or share with them any sort of medical devices, or they're able to come in your home. Having that information somewhere on your fridge or somewhere accessible is really important. And I mentioned something that I like to keep on my fridge because I've been talking a lot about there's a lot of info that I want to keep somewhere safe. And I have this little one pager. It's a little hard to see because my screen is blurred out, but I have shared it with everyone so they can share it with you. But it just says important emergency information. On one side, you've got all the county phone numbers. And on this side, this is all blank and you can fill this in. So those numbers I mentioned, points of contact, your doctor, your pharmacy, there's empty lines for you to fill all of this out. There's a little information on Arlington Alert, just in case you forget how to sign up. And then on the bottom, there's a whole section where you can write your medications, your medical alert info, and any other information. I have one of these filled out in my household and it's taped to the front of my fridge. So I always know that it's there. In the case of an emergency, I have all my numbers in one place. If anywhere were to come into my household, they would immediately see what allergies we have in our household and what needs we have as well. And then on the back of this guide, and we'll talk about this next, there's a list of all the items you should keep in your emergency kit, and then some information if you have pets in your household on how to prepare for them as well. So I've shared that with the team and hopefully they can share it out with you at the end of this presentation. So step number 2.
A comment from Anita.
Sure.
that the A&V office has that file of life on hand. So if anybody wants one, contact the office.
That's awesome. That's great. Yeah, we DHS, the Department of Human Services, we did a course together recently, and we found those file of life, and they're just amazing because they have all that information in it. So that's another way. And the other nice thing about this file of lives is that you can fill it out with a pencil. You could erase it as information changes, and it's like a little pocket that goes in the fridge. So if you need to put a copy, for example, of your insurance card, you can make a copy of it, stick it back there, right? And so it has like a little envelope that you can put information in, which is really, really great. And you can consistently update it as you need. So moving on to step number 3, we talked a little bit about building an emergency plan. Let's talk about building an emergency kit. So what is an emergency kit? It's also called a go bag, a grab bag, a disaster kit. It's a collection of items that you would have in your household that would help you in the case of an emergency. And you can use it during an emergency. It can include food, water, other supplies, and they don't have to cost a lot of money. This is one thing that I like to stress. You don't have to go online and buy a $300 emergency kit. I promise you, you don't. More than likely, you have items around your household that you can utilize to build a kit. So they can save your life. They include those basic supplies that I talked about, food, water, medicine. It's really important because it puts everything in one location. So if something were to happen and you have to leave your home quickly, or in the event of an emergency, you have everything stored in one location. You're not having to go and cherry pick and find where everything is. So that's really, really helpful. And I'd be curious and I'll ask everyone to put this in the chat. Some of you already did this earlier, but what can you guys think of, like 2 to 3 things that you would absolutely want to include in your emergency kit that you already have in your home? Feel free to put it in the chat. I know some of you mentioned a few items a little earlier.
Got flashlight and prescriptions.
Mm-hmm. Very true. Flashlight, prescriptions. Very important. Go ahead.
Somebody said, I used to have cash, but I spent it.
We'll talk about that too. Cash, okay.
Copy of important papers and documents.
Very important documents, absolutely.
Band-aids.
Mm-hmm.
Band-aids.
Band-aids, very simple first aid kit, absolutely.
Yep. Water and food.
Water and food, you need both of those things. Those are great. All right, let's take a look at what we have over here. So over here is a picture of just some items that you might include in your emergency kit, some of which you guys have already mentioned, which is great. Food and water for everyone in your household. The general rule is you want to plan for about 3 days. When you're thinking about foods that you might include in your go bag, you want to look for non-perishable items. You want to make sure that the date is still good. You don't want to eat expired food because that could put you at bigger risk. Something people sometimes forget, if you have cans, you want to have a can opener, right? So you can actually access the food. Think about things that are healthy if you can. So I like to keep some beans, some veggies, and some canned tuna in mind, just because those are things I know that I'll eat and they'll give me sustenance. So thinking through that, right? What has a longevity and also doesn't expire, but that you can access and will give you some sort of energy. You can also put energy bars in there. We have some Cliff bars in ours as well, in our car as well. Extra medicine, you guys mentioned that if you're able to get it for you and your family, and any pets if you have pets that have medicines. A flashlight, batteries for that flashlight. If you could even find a crank flashlight, that's even better, but just having some fresh batteries will do the trick. First aid kit doesn't need to be really fancy. You can do a lot with just some sanitizing wipes, some triple antibiotic, and a couple Band-Aids. That'll help clean out a wound should you need it. Battery or hand crank radio, which we talked about. Some personal hygiene items, toothbrush, toothpaste. Something that I like to do is if I'm ever traveling and I go to a hotel and they have those little bars of soap or the little souvenirs, toothpaste and stuff like that, I'll just grab them and I'll put them in my emergency kit. I'll take them home with me because it's a great use of them. Alternatively, I know dollar stores also have great, you can get like a travel pack. It's great to just grab one of that for like $1.25, throw it in your kit. Moist towelettes or baby wipes for hygiene reasons, to keep you clean. Fewer contacts, having those contacts, solution, glasses, face masks. They not only help keep us safe and healthy during a pandemic, but they help keep debris out of your lungs, right? Local maps, again, everyone seems to rely on cell phones. And I read somewhere that the youngest generation doesn't actually know how to read a map, which is a little alarming because we grew up reading maps. So it's having a local map could be really helpful in the case that internet does go down, or more than likely what'll happen is if we're in a crowded, densely populated area, you won't have strong signal. So you're going to really struggle to get internet connection. So just having a local map on you could be very helpful. Hand sanitizer.
Tanya, I've kind of lost track of the time, but we're almost at 11 o'clock. So
Okay.
just to let you know.
Perfect. I will quickly zip through the rest of this. Whistle. If someone can't hear you yell, they can hear you blow a whistle. If you're trapped in your car or your home, that's really important. Personal comfort item. I like to keep a deck of cards, some chargers, clothing, really important in the winter, gloves, extra pair of socks, hat, they'll keep you nice and warm. A pocket tool knife, duct tape, trash bags, hand warmers, emergency blanket. We talked about cash. It doesn't have to be a lot. I recommend if you can put $1 or $2 in a Ziploc bag. Copies of important documents is another one. Again, you could see it in the little photo. I've got some cash and some important documents just put in a Ziploc bag and then just store it in my kit just in case I need it. All right, don't forget about your pets. If you have a service animal, support animal, you can build a small emergency kit for them as well. Some things to think about. We already kind of talked about it. Some food and water for your pet, poop bags if you have dogs, or litter, toy. My dog gets very anxious when she travels, so having a little toy for her is helpful. Make sure your pets have a collar or they're microchipped. Take pictures. If you ever get separated, that's a great way to prove ownership. These are my animals. Use that buddy system that we talked about, really helpful. And then if you need it, the Animal Welfare League of Arlington does offer free microchipping and free pet emergency housing if you qualify. So just to quickly summarize, we went over a lot of information today. So we talked about 3 steps you can take to be prepared. First step is being informed and knowing who to call. We talked about having multiple and reliable sources of information, including Arlington Alert. We talked about having all of those county phone numbers written down, having your personal contacts written down, kept somewhere safe, like on your fridge. Step number 2, we talked about making an emergency plan, knowing where to locate with your family members and having a location, and then your personalized and medical needs. And then the third step we talked about very quickly was building an emergency kit at home and having enough materials in there for you, your family, and your pets. And that's it. Those are the 3 steps I'm going to leave you with to be prepared. So I just want to say thank you. And that's it for me. So unless you have any questions.
There's one question about who would be the best person or people to have as emergency contacts. For example, family but lives out of state, or a nearby friend or neighbor.
That's a great question. I usually recommend one of each. I usually recommend a family member who lives out of state, because in the case of an emergency that directly impacts your neighborhood, your building, your area, they're going to likely have communication access that you may not otherwise have. So, and they're also a good point of contact. For example, I mentioned my mother is one of my points of contact. So if my partner and I were to ever get separated, we would both know to call her and she would know to call us to make sure that we are accounted for. And the second point of contact, I would make a friend, a neighbor, someone close by, someone that can come check on you in case communications do go down. You don't need to be on Twitter or on email to make sure everything is okay. Having that buddy system and saying, hey, would you mind checking in on me once a week? Or would you mind picking up the groceries, or et cetera, is really helpful. It can go very far.
Okay, and we have a final comment here saying, thank you for your most efficient setup for the first COVID-19 vaccines. She got her first 2 shots at Lubber Run, and both times really appreciated how friendly everybody was and how smooth and seamless the operation was.
Oh, you're very welcome. That warms my heart. I'm very thrilled to hear that. I hope everyone has had a positive experience, and I know it was a challenging time. So thank you for those kind words.
Well, Tanya, I can only echo that one, because my experience at Sequoia Center was excellent. I think all of our group has been vaccinated at least a few times now, and we've really felt the support of Arlington County. You do a fabulous job, and this was an excellent presentation, nice and concise. I guess we're ready to stop recording, and I do want to just end by asking you, what's your education, or how do you become an expert in emergency preparedness?
That is a good question. What I love about emergency management is a very holistic field. So on our team alone, we have so many different backgrounds. I actually wanted to do this activity once and asked everyone to send me their backgrounds. And we have nurses, we have EMTs, we have communication professionals, we have public health experts. So the answer to that is really your passion for it. And what's interesting about emergency management is, given the complexity of the field, there's really space for everyone. So I came to it by ways of communication and public engagement, having worked a lot with the COVID response. It was a natural transition for me to join this team, and I love to meet with the public and educate them on preparedness. So it was a great fit. But you don't have to be an emergency management specialist in order to get involved in the field. And I will say too, if anyone's interested in how you could be part of the response, our community emergency response team, or CERT, is always looking for volunteers. And so you're welcome to consider looking at CERT as well.
Well, Gary is a CERT member.
Yay!
And maybe others from A and B. I'm not sure about that. I think we might have had some others. So thanks to everybody who participates in CERT. And, another thing that A and B provides is a check-in phone call to make sure that everybody's okay who wants to be periodically checked on. So that is another one of the services that we provide for our members. With that, we're going to say thank you and hope to see everybody next week.
Great. Thank you. Good job.
Thanks for having me.